In this video, I'm going to explain how I improved my ACT score from a 31 to a 36 and how my students are consistently able to improve their scores by 5 points or more. So we're going to cover the ACT hacking system that I created here through my own trial and error. And this is going to show you exactly how you can reach your potential on the ACT and how you can use that score to earn massive scholarships and get into your top choice colleges. So go ahead and get ready because I'm going to give you the exact system that consistently gets students the scores that they need for college. And look, I know you're probably thinking, there's no way this is going to work for you. You've tried everything before, but just let me say, I promise the system has worked for someone in your exact situation. So whether you're a great student, but you're a bad test taker, or you're a bad student and a bad test taker, or if you have too many extracurriculars or you have a different learning style, it really doesn't matter. I've used the system on every type of student, and it's worked for every single one who's followed it from start to finish. When I was prepping for the ACT myself, I personally wasted hundreds of hours of my own time seeing absolutely no score improvement. So now my goal is to make sure that students don't waste their time as well. I don't have the ability to coach everybody one-on-one. So what I do is I make these videos to help people that I can't personally coach on an individual basis. So if you're getting ready to take the ACT and apply to colleges, or if you have a student who's in that same situation, go ahead and sit down and pay attention because this video could change the trajectory of your entire life. So what we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to go back to the beginning here because we didn't always have this 36 right here. This is my ACT score. I now have a 36 in all sections. This is a letter from the CEO of the ACT company saying congratulations on getting your perfect 36. But we're gonna have to go back to the beginning because this was not always the case. So we're gonna have to go through my own personal ACT journey. And it all started off with me being a cocky high school student who ended up getting humbled the first time that he took the ACT. So I thought I was like the greatest high school student ever. I had a 4.0 GPA, was taking a bunch of AP classes. But when I walked into the testing center to take that ACT and I thought I was going to get a 36, I ended up realizing kind of halfway through the test, I was like, oh my gosh, I really did not know how to answer those math questions. Didn't get to finish all of the questions of the section. Knew I was not going to do that great. Thought it was the complete end of the world. And I ended up getting a 31 on this test the first time that I took it here. So that's the part where I got humbled. Thought I was going to walk in, breeze my way to a 36 because I thought I was the smartest thing ever, but ended up with a 31. So what happened is I went back and I studied a bunch. Figured that I would go ahead and just brute force my way to a perfect 36, just like I'd done with pretty much all of my other classes in high school. Just study a bunch, get the great test score, and then everything will be all right with the world. So went back, studied all of the algebra, all of the geometry, all of the statistics questions on the math section, because that's where I struggled heavily. Learned all of the grammar rules that I thought I needed to know, did a bunch of reading comprehension, chemistry, biology, everything for science, so on and so forth. And still, the next time that I took that test, got completely stumped again, mostly by that math section, but really, honestly, by all four sections. My score went up a little bit in English, went down a little bit in the other sections, and still ended up with a 31 on the test. So not only did I get humbled one time, but this getting humbled piece right here, this happened a couple times. The ACT is a test that will humble you if you do not prepare correctly. And that's what I learned right here. And so going on from getting humbled, I kind of almost gave up on the entire ACT. I was like, okay, well, this is maybe just not the test for me. I'm not going to get into an Ivy League college with a 31. Maybe I'll still get into a great school. I'll still maybe earn a little bit of scholarship money. But overall, I'm just going to give up. Maybe it's just not the right test for my situation. But this actually led me to where Gary Sheffield here made a pretty significant impact on my ACT score. And so the background story for this one is I was actually a baseball player in high school and in college. And so one day my teammates and I were actually fortunate enough to have a smaller little practice with Gary Sheffield and have him kind of show us exactly what we were doing wrong on the baseball field and have us kind of tell us how to hit a lot better than we were hitting. And the story here is that after we were warming up a little bit, we warmed up by just hitting balls off the tee. And then one of my teammates actually asked Gary Sheffield if we were going to go and hit balls off of a pitching machine. And this is actually where Gary Sheffield made the biggest impact on my ACT process, because he heard this question about the pitching machine and immediately he was like, absolutely not. You know, there's absolutely no way that I'm ever going to have any of my players hit off of a pitching machine. For those of you who don't know what a pitching machine is, it's just a machine that a coach or a player puts baseballs into, and it kind of shoots the balls at the hitters, so that the coach doesn't, or the coach or the player doesn't have to actually throw the balls overhand themselves. They get to save a little bit of their arm strength and still get a good velocity on the baseball. But Gary Sheffield said, absolutely not. We will never hit off of a pitching machine because it's completely unrealistic to what we're going to see in the game. No real human being throws a baseball at the angle that comes out of a pitching machine, and it does not simulate a game environment at all. Like when somebody is throwing a baseball overhand, it looks completely different. There's a completely different trajectory that the ball follows. It's going downward a little bit versus a pitching machine that a lot of times goes straight or even maybe upward a little bit. So basically he said, why would you ever practice something that you're not going to see in the game? And that statement right there with the snap of a fingers pretty much changed my entire test prep approach, because what I was doing was trying to study all of the math concepts, trying to study all the English concepts, all the science stuff that was going to be covered on the ACT. And I wasn't actually preparing for the types of questions that were going to show up on the ACT. And so instead of studying all of the algebra, geometry, English rules, and chemistry, biology, and so forth, what I started doing was using real ACT practice questions and seeing the actual ways that the ACT asked these questions rather than what I was learning in my high school classes in terms of the content of the test. And again, this is where my willingness to spend hundreds of hours studying actually kind of paid off for me a little bit. So basically what I did is I now brute forced my way through it, but instead of doing that on algebra and geometry, I did it on real ACT practice tests. So I took about a dozen real full-length ACT practice tests. Basically, every single test that I could find, I just sat down and I took all of them. And this led me to this next piece of my ACT journey, which is these buckets over here. And so after finally taking like 40 or 50 hours worth of ACT, like real practice tests, I started to actually come to some sort of progress and realize something. And that is that all questions started to kind of look the same. Every single question that I saw on the ACT, I figured out that I could categorize them into a type of question or a bucket of question. For example, there's yes, yes, no, no questions on the science section. There are big picture questions on the reading section. There are little picture questions on the reading section. There are coordinate plane triangle questions on the math section. Basically, every single question that the ACT asks has been asked in a similar way in the past. They haven't changed the ACT structurally since 1989. So there's been 35 years of them asking the same types of questions over and over again. And that's where I was able to basically find every single question type that they've ever asked in the past and categorize each question into one of these buckets. And then once I was able to categorize every single question into a bucket, what I did is I found the most efficient way to solve each bucket of questions. So I came up with an approach for solving yes, yes, no, no questions. I came up with an approach for solving big picture questions, little picture questions, all types of questions. I just created my own most efficient method of solving each one of these. So I wasn't wasting any time when the actual test came around, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. So it's basically a win-win situation here where I was able to answer questions faster and more accurately. And once I was able to answer the questions both quickly and accurately, obviously that's all you really need on the ACT. And I ended up scoring my perfect 36 not too long after that. But the key here, I think a lot of people hear me say this stuff and they think, oh, the key is just take a dozen practice tests. But that is not the key. The key here is actually analysis of the practice tests that you take. I actually wasted a ton of time here. There's no reason I needed to take a dozen practice tests. I probably could have taken one or two of them and just really spent a lot more time analyzing the types of questions that I was missing rather than just taking a dozen of them, spending 40 or 50 hours doing that and waiting for the question types to basically smack me in the face. That's what I did. And again, I wasted tons and tons of hours by doing this and making all of these mistakes. I could have probably prepared for the test in like 30 or 40 hours total, but instead I went back, I spent like probably 120 hours here, spent 40 or 50 hours taking practice tests, and then spent, again, after that, that was hundreds of hours coming up with ways to solve each question type. If I had had an efficient process for doing this, it probably would have taken me like 30 or 40 hours total. But eventually I still did get that 36, and along with the 36 came all of the perks that you typically hear about. So I ended up getting accepted into two different top 5 colleges. I got accepted into MIT and U Chicago. U Chicago is the degree hanging on the back of the wall over there. I ended up earning almost $500,000 in scholarship offers from different schools. Even my baseball career got a little bit of a benefit. I earned some Division I offers that I probably should not have earned just because the coaches wanted me on the roster to bring up the average ACT score. I got bragging rights over my older brother because he didn't quite have that 36 on the ACT. And even a couple years later, after I took the ACT, it was still paying me benefits. It was pretty much what landed me my investment banking job right out of college as well. Yes, like the ACT actually does matter when your employer is looking at your resume. So that's actually something that a lot of employers will ask for. A lot of students in high school don't even think about that stuff, but your employer will care about your ACT score if you're applying for those prestigious jobs. So at this point, everything was all good. Graduated from college, was working my investment banking job that I got from the 36. And this is when my sister here starts preparing for the ACT herself. And what happened is my mom signed her up for just kind of a generic prep class to kind of get her ready. And I realized as she was doing this that she was basically making a lot of the same mistakes that I was making back in the day, wasting a lot of her time. That prep class that my mom had signed her up for was basically just having her do practice tests over and over again with no real analysis of the questions that she was getting correct and incorrect. And so again, I saw myself and her just wasting a ton of my time. And I didn't want her to end up going through that same process of wasting hundreds of hours of time on the ACT. So what I did is I pulled her personally out of this ACT prep class and I basically just taught her myself. So rather than the prep class where they were just spoon feeding her information and she wasn't actually learning anything, I brought her through the exact process that I went through with the whole Gary Sheffield story, learning all of the types of questions that the ACT can ask, and then actually making sure that she was able to solve those on her own without just spoon feeding her the information like she was getting done to her in that ACT prep class. And that really kicked off my entire ACT coaching program because we ended up getting a great outcome for her, taking her from a 28 to a 33 and getting her into the school that she wanted to go to, which is Notre Dame, by the way. A lot of her friends kind of came to me and said, hey, what happened here? Like, how did you guys end up with such a great outcome? And I ended up coaching a lot of her friends as well. And basically, that is the story of how I am now helping students to hack the ACT, consistently gain 4, 5, or even more points on the ACT from start to finish. And the reason that I'm still doing the ACT specifically many, many years later is because this is the most consistent and reliable way of getting high schoolers into the college of their dreams. It's not the SAT, it's not high school classes, and it's not clubs that will get you into the college that you need, at least consistently and reliably. If we can spend 30 or 40 hours getting ready for the ACT, that's where we can make a significant score improvement that can basically change your entire life. There's no way to prepare consistently for the SAT, especially now that they've transitioned over to the digital version. There's no way that you can spend 30 or 40 hours on your high school classes and make any significant improvement in your GPA. High school classes will probably require thousands of hours in order to properly get that 4.0 that you need to get into the best colleges and so forth. There's no way to make an improvement with 30 or 40 hours, and definitely not clubs either. Being the kid who joins a million different clubs is going to make zero impact on your college resume. So that's why I chose the ACT, because we can put in 30 or 40 hours and make a significant life-changing outcome for each student that I work with. And so now that you have some of the background here, I'm going to just walk you through the exact system that I use to help all of my students hack the ACT and gain 4, 5, or even more points on this test. And of course, quick little plug, if you are interested in having me help you do this exactly, I'm going to show you in this video, but if you're interested in having me walk you through the process entirely from start to finish, you can just apply using the information in the description down below. I'm sure there will be something in there that tells you exactly how you can apply to work with me. But other than that, let's go ahead and get into why most ACT preparation sucks. And this is kind of the key here, is taking the old version, throwing it away, and eventually we're going to implement the right way of doing things. But here we have to start off with what most people are doing. So most people have some sort of haphazard preparation where they don't really have a full laid out plan for exactly what they're going to do one day at a time. And what they end up doing is just haphazardly approaching each section of the test, if they're even breaking it down into each section. And what happens is they just take one step forward and end up taking one or two steps backward. Like they try and study for science one day, maybe they get a little bit better in science, and then the next week they study for math, and while they're improving their score in math, they're taking a step or two back in the science section. They don't have a consistent and reliable path to actually improving on the ACT. What we also see most people doing is they hear about these practice tests like I talked about, and they just entirely focus on practice tests. They just do repetitive over and over again practice tests, and a lot of times, even then, they never come to the realization that I came to after taking a dozen of these in a row. It kind of smacked me in the face a little bit that all the questions are kind of repeated. But if you never really get to that realization, all you're doing is wasting your time taking practice tests. And if you're not analyzing those practice tests, you're never going to actually make any improvement. You're just going to become a little bit more familiar with the structure of the test. And that's where we see a lot of people going wrong as well, especially when they're in ACT prep classes where they're being told to take these practice tests, and then they're just being spoon-fed the answers from their instructor or from their solutions guide from the ACT prep book that they bought. So again, if you're going through the process of taking practice tests, that's good, but you cannot just be spoon-fed the correct answers when you miss something. So like if you get an incorrect answer, you have to actually understand why you missed that, and you can't just be told, okay, yeah, this is the correct answer, because then you're not actually learning anything. And then the next problem that we see here with most students is that they're just doing general studying and they're not giving any priority to the most important topics where they're actually missing the most number of questions. My example here is students a lot of times will miss a couple questions at the end of the math section on like those really tough questions at the end, and they'll want to focus all their time on trying to learn a brand new concept or figure out a very tough abstract question when they may have only missed like 2 or 3 questions at the end of the math section. And earlier on the easy questions, they missed like 18 questions. So if we can just focus on the 18 questions that we missed earlier on and not the 3 tough ones at the end, then we're going to make a pretty big jump in our ACT math score. We don't have to learn how to do the 3 toughest ones if we still have to actually learn how to do the 18 easy ones. And we can just do that in a lot less time than it would even take to learn the new concepts to get those 3 questions correct. So if you don't prioritize the most important concepts, again, you're going to be wasting your time just like I was when I was studying for the ACT. And then in addition to all those things, what most people have is little to no access to people who actually know what they're talking about. And if they do have an instructor, there's no guarantee that that instructor actually knows what they're doing and has the ability to educate other people on what they know. So even if an instructor is great at the ACT, a lot of times there's a difference between being great at the ACT and being great at actually telling people and I guess translating that information in a way that other people can understand. And basically all of this just adds up to be a frustrating experience where the parent and the student are wasting their time. The parent is wasting their money and the student is really wasting their effort. And I know exactly how this process can be because I have seen it before with myself. I saw it before with my sister. I've seen it with tons and tons of my students, and everybody is just left wanting a simple outline that they can follow in order to improve their score consistently and reliably. So now, basically what we do with the correct way, the right way of doing things, is we just basically flip all that stuff on its head and we do the exact opposite of what most people do. So the right way of preparing for the ACT is to start off by identifying all of our strengths and our weaknesses and put out a schedule so that we're not haphazardly approaching the ACT. We're going to put out a schedule for approaching all of the high priority question types. So the questions that we're missing the most number of points on is where we should be focusing our time at the beginning of our preparation process. And again, this schedule will let us know exactly what to study and on what days we should study that information. And the next piece of this is actually learning how to recognize a question type. So this is where we go through and we categorize all of our misses into buckets of questions, and we come up with a way that we can actually solve those buckets of questions. Again, everyone's going to be individual here, so there's no one way of approaching each question type. That's where each student needs to really have their own way of approaching these questions. And then the final step here is reinforcement of that learning. So not just learning how to solve the question type, but reinforcing that learning and making sure that the student is proving their ability to solve each and every question type, even without the guidance there. So you need the guidance in order to actually figure out how to solve that question, but you can't just listen to somebody else solving it. You have to make sure that you're reinforcing that learning, and then you can solve that question without the guidance. Otherwise, you're not going to make any improvement on the ACT, because obviously you don't get your instructor or your notes with you when you're in the testing room. And now all of this stuff that we just talked about results in steady and incremental improvement from when you start preparing until you reach the testing center on that Saturday and you take the ACT. And of course, when I was creating my own ACT coaching program, we just basically took all of the things from the right way and we lay it out for all the students themselves. So in my program, I basically just use all of my experience over the past 6 years to identify the strengths and weaknesses for the students so they don't have to do it for themselves. I personally lay out the schedule. I find all the high priority question types that we need to study, and I make sure that the student knows exactly what to study and when. I personally walk the student through the process of learning, making sure that they know how to recognize a question type. And I also make sure that they're reinforcing their learning and they're not just listening to me solve the problem for them, and that they're actually able to solve each problem without my guidance. So again, another little shameless plug here. You can go ahead and just check out the information in the description below the video, or go over to my Instagram page. If you message me the word boost, then you can learn more about what that program might look like for you or your student. Again, just another little shameless plug there. But now we can basically go over here and we can see this stuff actually works for students in the real world. So Ava, for example, she came to me. She was actually, I think, very similar to what I was in high school. She was a 4.0 student, taking a bunch of AP classes, but she had this original ACT score of a 22, which was obviously not up to her standards of what she wanted. You can see the quote here. She always did well in school, but she struggled with standardized tests. I basically showed her the ACT hacking process. You cannot just treat the ACT like a normal high school test. So what we did is we implemented all of the strategy that she needed to learn in order to get comfortable with the test. We made sure that she was actually learning things and not just hearing things go in one ear and out the other ear. And after just 6 weeks of working with her, we ended up with a 30 on the ACT. So an 8-point score improvement in just 6 weeks. And this actually ended up earning her almost $90,000 at her dream school. And again, another example here, Morgan. Morgan was a great student. I loved working with her. She is one of the students who was kind of caught up on the SAT for a while, and she had originally taken an SAT prep class. Again, another one, this is kind of similar to what my sister was in. Very generic class, group class with an instructor who didn't really take an individual approach with every student. I kind of took a consultation with her, told her about the ACT, showed her some of the reasons why the ACT is more consistently just a better test to prepare for over time. And basically she fully bought in. We worked through a program over the course of 8 weeks with her, and we took her score from an original of a 26 to a final score of a 32. So another great outcome there for Morgan. And then Reese, another one. I loved working with Reese. He was actually very similar to what I was doing back when I was in high school. He, just like me, thought that he was well prepared the first time he took the ACT. Again, he was maybe not as cocky as I was, but I think he was somewhere in that range. However, after he took that ACT the first time, he got a 30, was not satisfied with that because he wanted to go again to an Ivy League college and earn a ton of scholarships. So after we worked together for a couple weeks, he also came to the realization that there's more to this test than just your typical high school test. We taught him about all of the buckets of questions, the ways to approach all of those buckets, and he really absorbed that information very well. And after a couple weeks of working with Reese, we ended up scoring a 35. And he, of course, got into the college that he wanted to. He also earned a ton of money in scholarships as well. Obviously, you could take a 35 and go pretty much anywhere to earn a bunch of scholarship money. So that's exactly what he did. So again, this process works. And if you're looking for more stories just like that, we've got plenty. We had Ever Meyer here, who again came to me, didn't really know what he was doing on the ACT, ended up improving his score by over 6 points. Getting into the school that he wanted to go to. We've got Austin here. He's a little bit blurry in this picture, but again, very similar story, very similar score improvement. But again, I'm not going to bore you with all of the stories. I'd rather jump in now to showing you exactly what this ACT hacking process looks like and how you can use it to take your score to the next level, get that dream score, and get the college acceptance that you really want. Okay, so step number one in this little overview of the ACT hacking process. The goal of step number one is to get down to our roadmap schedule so that we know exactly what we're going to do on every given day of our process leading up to the test. And the way we do this is by starting off with this diagnostic test right here. So we're going to take a full length practice ACT, ideally from one of the ACTs that they've actually administered in the past. So we're going to grade it on a scale from 1 all the way up to 36. And we're going to use this to determine our high priority areas. So whichever type of question we're missing the most of, that's obviously where we have the most room for improvement, and that will likely be our highest priority area that we need to focus on. So all this comes back to the process of identifying the buckets of questions that we're missing the most of. So we need to know our question types, recognize the patterns and the types of questions that we're missing, see which ones are similar to other ones that we're missing, and those will be our question types that we need to focus on going forward. And so based off of these two things, the diagnostic test and then the high priority areas that we find from that diagnostic test, we're going to combine those together to create our roadmap schedule. And what we should do with this roadmap schedule is, again, start with obviously our highest priority items and then work our way down the list until we have fixed every single type of question and we can just answer any type of question that the ACT throws at us on that test day. And so according to this roadmap schedule, we will go through, again, with our high priority items. So highest priority items first, and then we'll continue going through until we get all the way down to the bottom of the list. We start off by fixing our content knowledge, and this looks like learning all of the grammar rules that we don't know. So all of the questions that we're getting wrong because we're missing semicolons, colons, and periods, or we don't know the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause. This will all be content knowledge that we need to learn. And of course, I've recommended free resources out there in the past: Grammarly, Khan Academy, YouTube. Shout out to my own YouTube videos for some question types as well on this content knowledge. These are all great ways to learn some of the content that we're deficient in. And along with that, paired up with this is creating proper strategies so that we can answer all of the other types of questions that we're missing, not just ones that we're missing because of content, but also the ones that we're missing because we didn't understand what the question was asking, we didn't have enough time. All of that stuff will feed into creating the proper strategies. And again, all of these questions fall into different question types. So we have a strategy for approaching yes, yes, no, no questions on the science section. And we have the right content to get a dependent clause or independent clause question right on the English section. And then once we've gone through and we've created a process for getting all the questions right, both for content and for strategy, then again, that's when we have all of these buckets solved. And we've created at least an approach that we can take for all types of questions on the ACT. Of course, at this point, we've only just brushed the surface. We're not going to be anywhere near done with our studying. So at this point, we're still in step 2 here. This is where we find batches of similar question types to the ones that we missed on our diagnostic test and the ones that we've identified as our high priority areas. So we'll take our high priority areas and we'll come down here and we'll have batches of similar questions. So now we can take all of the approaches that we just found for our content knowledge and for our new strategies that we've just created for ourselves in order to actually solve those question types. And we will try and practice this on similar questions. And first, the way that I recommend students start doing these batches of similar questions is by having your notes or by having, if you have like lecture videos or something along those lines to help you out and help you remember what your strategy and what your content is, then answer those questions with your notes and with that outside assistance at first. And then once you get comfortable actually doing those questions and getting those questions right with the assistance, then you would want to remove that assistance, take away your notes, turn off the videos, and try and answer those questions on your own with no assistance. And only when we start to make progress on those questions with no outside assistance do we actually have this learning occurring. So we've solved these questions with notes, And then we've gone and we've solved the questions without notes. And only once we've been able to do both of those things is when we can actually say that real, true learning has occurred, because now we're going to be presented with the same set of circumstances. We're going to see the same type of question on the next ACT test, whether it's practice or real, and we're going to have a different process than we did when we got the question wrong. We're now going to go through the correct process, and we're going to get that question right. And now we can move on. This is where we get into, I guess, further into step 3, where we have this learning occurring. So once we have the learning that's actually occurred, we're going to go and we're going to practice individual practice sections, again, for our highest priority sections first. So if we have the most room for improvement on the math section, that's going to be our highest priority section that we're going to work on individual math sections first. So there's no real need to take full length practice tests if we've only focused on math and we've only had learning occur for the math section. So we'll focus first on math practice section, that's our high priority section to focus on. And we should see that score become much higher than it was back up on this diagnostic test because of the learning that's actually occurred down here. And then once we have done this and we start to see improvement on these individual practice sections for all 4 sections of the test, that's when we'll move on and we'll start to take practice full-length ACTs to mimic what's going on in the actual testing center on test day and get us in a great place to actually approach that test by the time 8 a.m. rolls around on test day. We should not be surprised when anything is thrown at us by the time we get to the real ACT, because we've done everything that we possibly could to prepare. We've done our practice sections and we've simulated the real test with these practice full-length exams. And all of this basically combines together to ingrain the learning in our minds so that when we get to that testing room, we don't even have to think twice about what we're doing. That's what true learning is, and that's what ingraining the learning does. So I always make the comparison of a professional athlete. A professional athlete has seen the circumstances so many times that they're going to see in a game that by the time they get to the game, it's like second nature. They don't have to focus on their mechanics, and they're not going to get overwhelmed by the crowd noise and the bright lights and all that stuff, because everything is literally just automatically ingrained and it's second nature to what they're doing. And of course, this is the exact process that I went through, except obviously much more simplified and with a lot more efficiency. And more importantly, it's the process that I've been able to take a lot of my students through, from Henry, who we only worked together for a few weeks and we took his score from a 23 all the way up to a 27. And we're going to continue working together, and he's going to probably end up strongly into the 30s the next time he takes this test. So he's got a great testimonial. I think he's going to come around and he's going to have another great one coming out pretty soon when he ends up into the 30s. But obviously, this is how we all should be reaching our dream ACT score. And then we're going to use that dream ACT score to get into the college of our dreams as well. Just like we did for plenty of students in the past. For me, that happened to be the UChicago degree that's hanging on the wall behind me. For Sheridan down here, actually, she happens to be right here. For Sheridan, this was us taking her from a 24 up to a 30 on the ACT, even though she was basically, she came to me, she said she was completely lost on the math section because she actually went to a French school system, and I guess they taught math a little bit differently out there. And she had absolutely no idea. And in her own words, she had no idea what the math questions were asking her. We ended up getting her into her dream school of Northeastern and a great program out there with her great score of a 30. And I mean, it's countless other students as well. We've got Claire down here as well. She ended up with a 30, very similar to everybody else. She also struggled pretty heavily on the math section, and we ended up getting her up to a great score. She's going to be able to take that, and by the time her college admissions rolls around, she's going to be ending up in a great place too. And along with these great scores, obviously comes the great scholarship dollars that are attached to that. There's actually a study done by Granite a couple years back. They found that on average, an extra 1 point on the ACT gives you an extra $8,451 in total scholarship dollars. And that was actually a couple years ago, before the price of tuition continued to skyrocket. So an extra 1 point on the ACT would probably get you a lot more than this $8,451 today, but that's just on average. Again, we've got students like Ava, who I think I've talked about. She might not even have made the pictures here, but she got a $90,000 scholarship to her dream school. Oh yeah, she was actually up here. So that's why I couldn't find her. So yeah, that was Ava. She got $90,000 in scholarships. So even more than that $8,451 you would expect from 1 extra point. So yeah, that's pretty much it here. This is the exact system that I used, except this is with a lot more efficiency since I wasted a ton of my time. This is the exact system that all of these students have used in order to take their ACT scores from where they were when they came in to 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7, and even 8-point score improvements on the ACT. And if you've made it through all of this entire video, then you're probably pretty interested in going through this ACT hacking process. So I've basically laid it all out for you right here. Now, if you want me to implement this for you, you want me to take your hand and walk you through this full process, and you don't feel like you want to take your own diagnostic test, try and identify your own high priority areas, and come up with your own schedule, come up with your own solutions for each type of question, I will do all of this for you. I will make sure that you get to exactly where you need to go so that we can end up with our dream ACT score, the college admissions that we want, and the scholarships that we need in order to avoid the cost of college. If you want me to do that for you, go ahead, check out the description down below. Whatever it is, there's either a link down there or it'll just tell you to go DM me on Instagram. Whatever it is, just go ahead and follow the instructions, reach out to me, and we'll discuss a way that we can take your ACT score to the next level.